My brother Brandon called me the night of Dad's funeral. Not to check in, not to ask how I was holding up. He called to ask whether I'd gotten a copy of the will yet, and whether Mom had said anything about the house. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the funeral home, still in my black dress, and I just stared at my phone for a second after he said it. I said, "Brandon, Dad was buried 6 hours ago." He said, I know. I'm just trying to get ahead of things." I hung up. That was the moment I realized something I'd been too close to see for 20 years. My brother wasn't getting ahead of things. He was just making sure he got his. Let me give you the actual numbers. Not the emotional version, the real one. The math of what it actually cost to be the child who stayed. I moved back to our hometown in Texas when I was 24. Not because I had to, because my parents asked me to, and because at 24, when your parents ask, you say yes. My dad had started having some health issues. Nothing catastrophic at first: high blood pressure, a bad knee, the usual slow accumulation of time. My mom was managing, but barely, and Brandon was in Chicago building his career, which everyone seemed to agree was the correct use of a firstborn son. So I stayed. Over the next 18 years, here's what staying looked like. I drove my dad to cardiology appointments every 3 months. When he had his first minor cardiac event at 68, I was the one in the ear at 2 a.m. I coordinated with 3 different specialists. I managed his medication schedule, which, by the time he was 70, involved 6 different prescriptions with different timings and interactions. My mom developed arthritis in her hands that made driving difficult, so I drove her too. Grocery runs, hair appointments, church on Sundays. The small things that add up to a life. The house needed a new HVAC system in 2019. I found the contractor, got 3 quotes, supervised the installation. When the roof started showing wear, same thing. When the back fence came down in a storm, I called someone and had it fixed before my parents even fully processed that it had happened. I also contributed to their monthly expenses. Not dramatically, I wasn't rich, but consistently. A few $100s a month toward utilities and groceries when things were tight. For years, Brandon came home for Thanksgiving most years. Christmas every other year. He'd sit at the table, eat the food my mom and I made, accept the card my parents gave him with money inside, and fly back to his life. My parents lit up when he walked in the door. I don't say that to be bitter. It's just true. He was the firstborn. He was the son. There was something in my parents that just oriented toward Brandon in a way that was bigger than logic. I was the one who handled everything, and I was also somehow the background. Dad had his major cardiac event on a Tuesday in March. I was at work when my mom called. I left immediately. By the time I got to the hospital, he was in the ICU, and the doctors were using words like significant and uncertain. I called Brandon from the hospital parking garage. He said, "How bad is it?" I said, "Bad enough that you should probably come." He said, "I've got a big presentation Thursday. Can I come this weekend?" I stood in that parking garage and took a breath. Dad's in the ICU, Brandon. I know, but if he's stable, come as soon as you can. He came 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, I slept in the hospital for times. I learned how to read a cardiac monitor because I was there so often. The nurses started explaining things to me. I made decisions about treatment options in consultation with doctors because someone had to, and the person who was supposed to be sharing that responsibility was in Chicago giving presentations. I called Brandon with updates every few days. Professional, informational updates, because that was the register he seemed to need. He said things like, "Keep me posted," and "Sounds like you've got it handled." I did have it handled. I always had it handled. That was the problem. When Brandon finally arrived, my dad was still in the ICU, but conscious. He squeezed Brandon's hand and smiled. My mom cried with relief when she saw him walk through the door. Brandon stayed for 2 days. Then flew back to Chicago. I stayed, like I always stayed. Dad passed away 11 weeks after the cardiac event. The last month was hard in a way I don't have complete words for. Not just the grief, the logistics of grief, which nobody warns you about. The medical equipment rentals, the hospice coordination, the paperwork that keeps arriving even as someone is dying, because the world doesn't pause. Brandon came back for the last week. I'll give him that. He was there at the end. The funeral was handled primarily by me. Brandon stood in the receiving line and accepted condolences. He's charming. Always has been while I coordinated with the funeral home, managed the catering, made sure the out-of-town relatives knew where to go and when. My mom watched all of this. I didn't think much about it at the time. I was too tired and too sad to think about anything except getting through each hour. But she was watching. After the funeral, Brandon went back to Chicago within the week. I stayed with my mom for a month, then moved back to my place, but came over 3 or 4 times a week. Made sure she was eating, helped her start going through my dad's things on her own timeline. Not rushing her, just being present. We talked more in those months than we had in years. Real conversations about my dad, about their marriage, about her life before she became someone's wife and someone's mother. And one evening, about 2 months after the funeral, she said something that stopped me. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I've been thinking about a lot of things. About what's fair, about what I've seen." I waited. "I'm going to call the lawyer this week. I want to change the will." I said, "Mom, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." She looked at me directly. "I watched you for 3 weeks while your father was in that hospital. I watched you for the last month of his life. I watched you at that funeral." She paused. "And I thought about the last 20 years. I haven't been fair to you." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full. "I love your brother, but I haven't been fair to you. And I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, honey." It was the first time in my adult life that my mother had apologized to me for something real. I cried. She cried. We sat at that kitchen table for a long time. 2 weeks later, she called the attorney. She didn't tell Brandon. She just made an appointment, went in and updated the documents. The house fully to me. The savings account fully to me. The small investment account my dad had kept for years fully to me. Brandon would receive her personal belongings and a portion of the remaining liquid assets. Not nothing, but not what he'd been expecting. I found out when her attorney called me to confirm I was aware of the changes, and to make sure I had a copy on file. I sat with that information for a long time. 20 years of being the background, 20 years of airport pickups and medication schedules, and 2 MRs, and someone finally looked at the whole picture and said that counts. It counted. My mom passed away 14 months after my dad. Her health had been declining, and honestly, I think part of her was just ready. She'd made her peace. She'd said what she needed to say. Brandon came home for the funeral. We were cordial, not warm, not close, but functional. After the service, the attorney held a reading of the will. I watched my brother's face when he heard the terms. He went very still, the way people go still when they're recalculating something important. After the reading, he pulled me aside. "Did you know about this?" She told me she was making changes. I didn't ask for specifics. This isn't fair. I looked at him for a moment. "Brandon, I drove mom and dad every doctor's appointment for 15 years. I was in the ICU for 3 weeks when dad had his heart attack. I handled the funeral. I was here every week for the last year of mom's life." He started to say something. I kept going, not loudly, just clearly. "You came home for Thanksgiving. You got an envelope with money in it at Christmas. And you got on a plane back to Chicago." Silence. Mom made her decision. She was of sound mind. She had 14 months after dad died to think about it, and she didn't change it back. His jaw tightened. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer." "That's your right." He did talk to a lawyer. He filed a contest. It went nowhere. My mom had been declared competent, the documentation was clean, and the attorney had kept thorough records specifically because he anticipated this possibility. The contest was dismissed. I still live in Texas, in the house I grew up in, which is mine now. Brandon and I don't talk much. A text at Christmas, maybe a call on birthdays if one of us remembers. It's not hostile, it's just accurate. This is the relationship that reflects the actual history between us. I think about my mom a lot. I think about that evening at the kitchen table. Her voice, steady and clear. "I haven't been fair to you." The way she looked at me when she said it, not guilty exactly, but fully present. Like she was making sure I actually heard it. I heard it. The thing I want people to take from this story is not about the inheritance, the money, the house. Those things matter practically. But that's not the point. The point is that someone finally saw the whole picture. For 20 years, I was the one who stayed, the one who handled it, the one who was quietly essential and loudly invisible. And my mother in the last chapter of her life looked at everything clearly and said, "This counts. You count." I didn't need a will to tell me my own worth, but I won't pretend it didn't mean something. It meant everything.